Okay, this is what it says, and I would be shaking and revealing and uncovering this information that I simply needed to know before I could ever move.
At 79 years old, Sally Field surprised many people when she finally spoke openly about the relationship that marked her heart more deeply than any other. For decades, she had been careful about discussing her private life. She was known as a respected actress, a two-time Academy Award winner, and a woman of strength and dignity. But behind the awards and the bright lights of Hollywood, there was a love story that never fully left her. When she reflected on her life and the men she had loved, one name stood above the rest: Burt Reynolds. Their connection was not simple, not peaceful, and not perfect. In fact, it was full of passion, conflict, misunderstanding, and deep emotion. Yet despite the pain, she later admitted that he was the only one who truly reached her in a way no one else ever had. To understand why this relationship meant so much to her, we must first understand who Sally Field was long before fame, romance, and heartbreak shaped her story. Sally Field was born in 1946 in Pasadena, California. From the outside, her childhood seemed normal. But emotionally, it was complicated. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother later remarried. Growing up in a home with a strict stepfather created fear and tension. Sally later spoke about feeling emotionally unsafe during her childhood. She learned to stay quiet, to read moods carefully, and to avoid conflict whenever possible. These habits helped her survive difficult moments, but they also shaped how she would love in the future. She developed a strong need for approval and reassurance. She wanted to feel chosen, valued, and protected. At the same time, she carried insecurity and self-doubt deep inside her. As a teenager, her life changed quickly. She was cast in the television show Gidget, and almost overnight, she became a recognizable face. Fame arrived before she fully understood herself. While other teenagers were learning about life slowly, Sally was working long hours in Hollywood. She was expected to smile, perform, and remain professional. On screen, she played cheerful and sweet characters. Off-screen, she was still trying to understand her emotions and her identity. This gap between public success and private uncertainty followed her into adulthood. Early fame can bring confidence, but it can also increase pressure. Sally wanted to be taken seriously as an actress. She did not want to remain known only as a light television star. Over time, she worked hard to prove her depth and talent. She eventually won major awards and gained respect in dramatic roles. But success did not erase her emotional patterns. Deep inside, she still longed for connection that felt safe and strong. Her first marriage came when she was still very young. Like many young people in the late 1960s, she believed marriage would bring stability and structure. She married Stephen Craig in 1968. They had children together, and Sally tried to balance motherhood with a growing career. But as she matured, she realized she had entered marriage before fully knowing herself. The relationship slowly broke down, and they divorced in 1975. It was painful and difficult, but it also forced her to grow. She learned that love alone could not fix emotional differences or personal growth. Her second marriage to film producer Alan Greisman in 1984 came during a more mature stage of her life. This time, she believed she understood herself better. They built a blended family and shared professional understanding. For a while, it worked, but even this marriage eventually ended in the early 1990s. Once again, Sally faced disappointment and emotional exhaustion. She began to see that relationships require more than good intentions. They require emotional balance and true compatibility. The story of Sally Field and Burt Reynolds begins on the set of the 1977 film Smokey and the Bandit. Both were at pivotal moments in their careers. Burt was already a Hollywood icon, known for his confidence, charm, and larger-than-life personality. Sally, though successful in television and emerging as a serious actress, was still finding her place among Hollywood's top stars. When they met, there was an instant spark, a connection that went beyond casual admiration or professional courtesy. On camera, their chemistry was undeniable, and off camera, They found themselves drawn to one another in ways that felt intense and unavoidable. Sally later reflected that from the very beginning, she sensed that Bert saw her in a way no one else had. She felt recognized, desired, and emotionally understood, and these feelings were new and powerful for her. It was the kind of connection that makes life feel larger, more intense, and more urgent. Their personalities complemented each other in intriguing ways. Sally brought depth, sensitivity, and emotional awareness. Bert brought confidence, charisma, and a bold energy that could fill any room. Sally often described herself as introspective, careful with her emotions, and thoughtful in her actions. Bert, on the other hand, was outwardly expressive, playful, and often relied on humor as a shield. Where Sally was careful and emotionally precise, Bert was spontaneous and energetic. For many, these differences might create tension, but for them, it created a magnetic pull. Each possessed qualities the other admired and lacked. For Sally, Bert represented a confidence and fearlessness that she sometimes struggled to access within herself. For Bert, Sally represented honesty, emotional sincerity, and a depth that challenged him to feel more fully and more honestly. The interplay of their strengths and weaknesses created a dynamic that was both thrilling and, at times, overwhelming. The intensity of their connection was amplified by the environment in which they met. Hollywood is a place of constant attention, scrutiny, and gossip, and being together in that world added pressure that few outsiders can understand. Every public appearance, every interview, and every photograph became part of the narrative that surrounded them. The media loved the idea of Burt Reynolds and Sally Field as a couple, two attractive, talented, and famous stars brought together by fate. Headlines and gossip columns followed their every move. While the attention could be flattering, it also added a layer of stress. They had to navigate private emotions under a public microscope, and that tension intensified every argument, every joy, and every moment of intimacy. Despite this, the bond between them remained strong because both felt an emotional connection that transcended fame or appearances. Their relationship was far from perfect, however. One of the major challenges they faced was a subtle but powerful emotional imbalance. Sally was fully invested emotionally. She wanted deep conversations, honesty, reassurance, and consistency. Burt cared deeply, but his style of emotional expression was different. He valued independence, humor, and maintaining a sense of control. When conflicts arose, Sally often wanted to confront and resolve issues immediately, while Burt sometimes withdrew or deflected with jokes. This created cycles of closeness followed by distance, and although the love was real, it was exhausting for both of them. Friends and colleagues often noticed the chemistry, but few understood the complexity beneath the surface. In private, the relationship required constant negotiation between need and independence, vulnerability and strength, intensity and restraint. Yet despite the challenges, Sally described this relationship as the most transformative of her life. Unlike previous experiences, this love did not simply provide safety or structure. It awakened something inside her. She learned the depths of her own emotional needs, the importance of setting boundaries, and the realization that love could be deeply passionate, yet imperfect. The intensity of her feelings for Burt, the highs of closeness, the lows of frustration and heartbreak shaped the way she approached relationships for the rest of her life. In many ways, this relationship forced her to confront long-held patterns, including the need to please, the fear of rejection, and the desire for emotional security. With Burt, these patterns were amplified, illuminated, and ultimately transformed, leaving a permanent mark on her heart, mind, and understanding of love. It was a connection that neither fame, divorce, nor time could diminish, a love that, in her words, was unmatched and unforgettable. As the relationship between Sally Field and Burt Reynolds deepened, life in Hollywood continued to complicate matters. Both were climbing the ladder of fame and success, while thrilling came with unique pressures. Burt was at the height of his stardom, often labeled as one of Hollywood's most charismatic leading men. He had built his reputation on confidence, charm, and a fearless persona that drew both audiences and colleagues to him. Sally, meanwhile, was emerging as a respected actress with serious dramatic range, earning accolades and admiration for her work. The combination of high-profile careers created a mix of excitement and strain. They shared experiences that few outsiders could relate to, yet this very intensity magnified every emotional misstep. Time apart due to work commitments, long hours on set, and the constant scrutiny of the public and media often left emotional gaps between them. Even small misunderstandings could feel magnified, and moments that should have been private became fodder for gossip columns, creating additional tension that neither could easily escape. One of the most challenging aspects of their connection was the difference in emotional styles. Sally valued closeness, conversation, and reassurance. She wanted to feel consistently chosen and understood, and she expressed her feelings openly and directly. Bert, while deeply caring, tended to protect himself with humor, confidence, and a desire for autonomy. When emotional conflicts arose, Bert often pulled back or avoided confrontation, while Sally sought clarity and resolution. This mismatch created cycles of highs and lows. Moments of intense connection and warmth were followed by periods of frustration and distance. Both invested heavily in the relationship, but the ways in which they gave and received love were not always aligned. Their bond required constant navigation, negotiation, and compromise, and while their love was undeniable, sustaining it was emotionally exhausting. Public attention added another layer of complexity. Hollywood thrives on spectacle, and a relationship between two famous stars inevitably becomes a performance in the eyes of the world. From photographs to interviews, every smile, every disagreement, and every affectionate gesture became part of a narrative shaped by others. Fans adored them, imagining them as the perfect couple, and journalists wrote endlessly about their chemistry and private moments. While this attention could feel flattering, it also intensified the stakes of their emotional connection. Private pain, disagreements, or insecurities were amplified under the public eye. Sally later reflected on how lonely she sometimes felt, despite the visible glamour of their relationship. The paradox of feeling emotionally isolated while appearing adored by the world became a recurring theme in their time together. In this environment, even moments of genuine joy were shadowed by stress, and emotional misalignment felt larger than it might have in private life. Despite these challenges, Sally and Bert shared profound and transformative experiences. Their love forced Sally to confront the depth of her own emotional needs and the ways in which she sought validation and security in relationships. With Bert, she could not simply rely on familiarity or comfort. She had to face raw feelings, vulnerabilities, and patterns she had long ignored. Their connection illuminated her strengths, her capacity for empathy, and her willingness to be emotionally courageous. She also learned the limits of what love alone could accomplish. Emotional compatibility, honest communication, and mutual support became central to her understanding of a healthy partnership. Bert, in his own way, also experienced growth through their connection, realizing the consequences of emotional avoidance and the significance of acknowledging the depth of someone else's feelings. Both were shaped by the intensity of the relationship, and although it ultimately did not last, it left lasting emotional imprints that neither could forget. The relationship's eventual end was not sudden, nor was it the result of a single catastrophic event. Instead, it was the slow accumulation of differences, unmet emotional needs, and the challenges of maintaining intimacy under immense public pressure. Sally needed consistent reassurance, openness, and a sense of emotional safety, while Bert's approach was more independent and private. Over time, these differences became increasingly difficult to bridge. Both loved each other deeply, yet love alone could not reconcile the imbalance. The breakup was devastating, leaving Sally to grieve not only the loss of a partner, but also the future she had imagined with him. She described the experience as one of the most painful chapters of her life. Bert, too, experienced regret and reflection, though in his own way. For Sally, this heartbreak became a turning point, a lesson in understanding herself, valuing her own needs, and recognizing that true emotional fulfillment requires balance, honesty, and mutual respect. The aftermath of Sally Field's relationship with Burt Reynolds was as emotionally intense as the relationship itself. For someone who had invested so much emotionally, letting go was not simple. Sally often spoke about the grief she felt, not just for the romantic bond that had ended, but for the shared dreams, the imagined future, and the deep sense of connection that seemed irreplaceable. This period of heartbreak coincided with one of the most important phases of her acting career. She channeled the intensity of her emotions into her work, and it was during this time that she delivered some of her most powerful and acclaimed performances. Her personal pain, paradoxically, became a source of creative fuel. Sally transformed her heartbreak into art, showing audiences a depth of feeling and authenticity that few performers could replicate. Roles she had once approached with curiosity now became a way to explore her own emotional journey, allowing her to work through sadness, longing, and vulnerability on screen. It was as if the screen provided both refuge and reflection, a safe space where she could examine the complexities of love, loss, and human connection. During this period, Sally also had to confront the emotional patterns that had shaped her relationships. She recognized that her tendency to seek approval, to give heavily in emotional terms, and to prioritize others' needs over her own had contributed to the strain she experienced. Bert's charm and confidence had drawn her in, but her own desire for emotional closeness and validation sometimes amplified the imbalance between them. Sally began to understand that love is not just about passion or intensity, it is also about compatibility, respect, and emotional reciprocity. She realized that even the most passionate relationships can falter if both partners are not aligned in how they give and receive love. This understanding was painful, yet essential. It marked a turning point in her personal growth, helping her set new boundaries, honor her own needs, and approach future relationships with greater clarity and self-respect. In addition to personal growth, the public scrutiny surrounding her breakup added a unique challenge. As a celebrated actress, every relationship and separation became a matter of public discussion. Journalists speculated endlessly, and fans often offered opinions on what should have happened. While Sally had long learned to navigate fame in her career, the emotional exposure of her private life was harder to manage. She reflected on the paradox of being admired by the world, yet feeling profoundly alone. The combination of public attention, personal heartbreak, and professional demands required her to cultivate resilience. Over time, she became adept at balancing her private life with her public persona, learning that emotional honesty and self-care were critical to her well-being. This period reinforced an important lesson: that self-worth and personal happiness cannot depend entirely on external validation, whether from partners, colleagues, or the public. Sally's experience with Burt also highlighted the transformative power of love, even when it ends. Unlike her previous relationships, this bond was not about seeking security or structure. It was about experiencing emotional depth, confronting vulnerability, and understanding the complex realities of partnership. The intensity of their connection challenged her, hurt her, and ultimately helped her grow in ways that no other relationship had. She came to understand that the value of a relationship does not rest solely on its longevity or perfection, but on the ways it teaches, stretches, and transforms the individuals involved. In her reflections, Sally acknowledged that the love she shared with Burt was unforgettable precisely because it was so real, full of flaws, intensity, and lessons that shaped her identity. The heartbreak, while devastating, became an essential part of her emotional evolution. It allowed her to approach subsequent relationships, life choices, and self-understanding with greater wisdom, confidence, and emotional maturity. By the time Sally reached her later years, she was able to speak openly about this chapter in her life, without minimizing its impact. She admitted that Burt Reynolds had been the only person who truly satisfied her emotionally, not because the relationship was perfect, but because it touched her in ways that no one else ever had. It was a love that forced her to confront her deepest fears, embrace vulnerability, and recognize her own worth. The lessons learned from this experience, about emotional honesty, self-respect, and the complexity of human connection became integral to how she understood love, life, and herself. In many ways, the relationship with Bert was the defining romantic experience of her life, a powerful reminder that true connection is about depth, understanding, and the courage to love fully, even in the face of inevitable pain. In the years following her relationship with Burt Reynolds, Sally Field gradually gained a perspective on love and self-worth that she had not fully possessed in her younger years. She reflected on how each stage of her life, childhood, early fame, marriages, and the intense bond with Burt, had taught her crucial lessons about emotional needs and personal boundaries. Sally often emphasized that understanding one's own feelings and being